Good evening, everyone. So glad you guys are all here. My name is Elizabeth Olson, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I became a Christian, and then I'm also just wanted to share a couple times in my life where I really felt like it was obvious that God's hand was at work. So I grew up as a missionary kid in the Philippines. My parents, I was 1 year old when we went over there, and I graduated from high school there. We would spend 4 years there and 1 year here. So I grew up in the church with a family that was very devoted to the Lord, and I count that a huge blessing. So those of you that are raising your children to love the Lord, bless you. It was incredible. I'm really thankful for that. And I would say that I probably became a Christian at the age of 4 or 5. So my parents, I heard it in the home all the time, but when I was in the U.S. for kindergarten, they had something called Joy Club after school. Jesus and Others and You is what it stood for, Joy Club. And they would tell Bible stories, and it was there that I gave my life to Christ. I remember being a kindergartner, but I remember them sharing the gospel and knowing that I was a sinner and that I needed to be forgiven and that I wanted to follow Jesus. So I was really young, and so sometimes when I talk to kids, like, I'll remind them, you guys, you're old enough to understand. Like, it doesn't mean you know everything, but I knew at that point that I wanted to follow Jesus. And so I truly believe that I became a believer in kindergarten. But as we know, our life is a process, right? And so that would be the time where I gave my life to Christ. But as we grow, I had lots of questions. And anybody that knows me well knows that I still have lots of questions. I am a questioner. I love to ask questions and sometimes have to be careful how I ask them. But when I was in 8th grade, I was going to get baptized, and I remember talking to my dad and saying, Dad, I feel like I still have questions. And he said, his response was, if you wait till you don't have any more questions, you'll never get baptized. But do you know that you want to follow Christ? And so I was baptized in 8th grade, and then when I went to college, I really wanted to make sure that my head knowledge was that my head knowledge was my heart knowledge. I didn't just want it to be my parents' religion. I loved being a Christian. I had no desire to turn away from the Lord. I just really wanted to check, like, are the things that I've learned really the things that I truly believe? And so for me, it came down to 2 questions. Is there a God, and is the Bible true? Because I figured if those 2 things were true, all the things that I'd been taught were right. But if either one of those was false, then I was in trouble and had to rethink everything. And so I didn't go into like great rebellion. I just was searching. I just really wanted to. So I asked a lot of questions, and a friend and I did a Bible study where we would go through different questions that we had and look up scripture for it. But for the is there a God, I got to go on a ski trip with some friends, and we were in Colorado, and I don't know if you've ever been skiing in Colorado, but it's not quite like Wilmot. Wilmot is like the bunny hill. So it took 3 lifts just to get to the top of the mountain. And I remember being on one of them, and they're so high, and the evergreens were just massive and covered in snow, and it was absolutely gorgeous. And I remember sitting there on one of the ski lifts, going up by myself, and just looking at this gorgeous tree and thinking, wow, did God know it would be that gorgeous when he made it? Or did he just create it and go, man, that turned out awesome? And so it was just kind of this obvious, the Bible talks about how creation will speak, and I knew that, but that was the moment where it hit me, okay, somebody had to create this. This doesn't just happen. And then is the Bible true? I did a lot of searching there's all kinds of, you can look at how the scripture that we have today is accurate to the scripture that we have, the earliest scriptures. And so part of that shows how God has protected his word, but it's still, it helped me see that what we have today in our Bible is accurate to what it probably was written, but it still to me said, but is it true, right? There could be a fairy tale that we have an accurate representation of the original, but how do I know it's true, right? And so for me, it kind of came down to seeing the truth of the Bible lived out in the lives of people around me and in my own life. And later, what I came down to was he doesn't ask for blind faith, but that there is an element of faith. And so I forget the verse, but it's something along the lines of God used their foolish teaching to shame the wise. And just the reminder that it's not all about knowledge. There is an element of faith, not blind faith, but that there is an element of faith. And so then through my life, so I still love being a Christian. I'm so thankful to be a part of the family of God. It is incredible. And this church is amazing. But there were 2 times in my life where I felt like I saw God very, very clearly at work. One of them was I was supposed to have jaw surgery when I was in college, right before my 21st birthday. And I thought we had it all planned out. My mom was going to come back from the Philippines because they were still overseas. And I was going to have surgery at the end. I was going to work at camp all summer, which I loved, have jaw surgery, recover, and be back at college, and everything was going to be great. Well, what happened was my brother went and got engaged, and which is awesome. I was excited about that, but that meant my parents couldn't afford 2 trips back to the U.S., and so my parents weren't going to be able to be there for my surgery. So I was kind of bummed about that. So I went to the surgery with my aunt, and of course they waited till I was all hooked up to all the IVs and everything before I had a cold and so I'm laying there ready to go into surgery, and they decide that we should wait, that we shouldn't do it now, that it would be too dangerous. And part of me was like, what's going on? I was so frustrated. But then what happened is they postponed it till October, and my brother was getting married in January, and so my mom was able to come back early. And I needed my mom. Like, the surgery was worse than I thought, and so just like looking back, you think, why did that all happen? But I really needed her, and God allowed her to be able to be there for me and for my brother. So that was a huge answer to prayer. And I'll be quick on this last one. When I was heading, so I grew up in the Philippines, but I always had a heart for Africa. I always was interested in going. And I remember thinking, like, is this just a selfish desire to see the world? I grew up in the Philippines. I've lived in the U.S. I've been to Europe. Like, is this just, I just want to see Africa? And one of my friends looked at me one time and said, well, it might be, but most people don't even want to go. So if you're interested, at least continue to look into it. So I started looking into it, but I always thought I would go overseas married. And I was single. Like, my life had gone perfectly according to plan until I graduated from college, and I had no husband. And I'm like, okay, I'm supposed to go overseas, but I'm not married. What's going on, Lord? So I continued to look. I got my 2 years of experience. I taught at Warren, and then I was getting ready to go overseas. But that was kind of a big issue for me. And so I was talking to somebody, and a friend of mine from church said, hey, did you know that I was living in Libertyville at the time. She says, did you know there's another girl from Libertyville, Illinois, that's going to Cameroon? I said, no. And it turned out that it was a girl that I had actually met. God used, we met at Caribou Coffee one time. She was doing her application to go to Cameroon. And my roommates and I, she was feeling like alone, like nobody her age was interested in missions. And my roommates and I were all interested in missions. And God had used that in her life to encourage her to go. And then later, I find out it's that same girl that we met is the one that is heading to Cameroon. And still no promise that we would be good friends, but to me it was just God's affirmation. Like, what are the chances? I'd never even heard of Cameroon. What are the chances 2 girls from Libertyville, Illinois are gonna go to the same country in Africa, to the same school? And we ended up living a floor apart. She was the matron of honor in our wedding. And it was just like God was saying, I'm gonna take care of you. Like, you're not married, but I'm sending someone with you. And then I got there, and I also was like, what am I doing now? I've got a great job. I get to play volleyball every week. Why am I going now? And I got to Cameroon, and they played volleyball every week. I was like, you thought of everything. So it was just really affirmation that I was in the right place, and it was so clear that God was at work. In fact, he had prepared me for it back in high school. I wanted to take Spanish, and all they offered was French. And when I wanted a car, I wanted a 4-door automatic, and I got a 2-door stick shift. And what do they speak in Cameroon? French. What kind of cars do they drive in Cameroon? Stick shift. And again, just being able to see how God uses all the weird things of your life to prepare you for where he has you going. So that's my testimony of God's work in my life and what a joy it is to be a follower of Jesus.